In this sublesson, which is the final sublesson in our discussion of the Power Query Editor, we will first talk about query best practices. We'll discuss disabling query loads from making it into the actual data model itself. We'll talk about creating and managing groups so you can better organize your queries. We'll discuss managing query properties. Then we'll take a look at applying step properties. We'll look at rearranging applied steps, which we've already taken a peek at. And we'll also view our query dependencies. So first, let's take a look at query best practices. So a few things to remember that we had covered through some of the sublessons here were to number one, bring only the data that you need into Power BI. So a couple techniques that you can use to do that are to first remove the rows that are not needed. So if you've got rows of data that are not needed for your analytics, don't bring them in. Secondly, you can go through and remove columns. So if there's columns that you have at data source that you do not need, once again, do not bring them into Power BI unless you actually need them. Next best practice is to go through and choose appropriate names for your columns. And lastly, what we want to do is on our columns is go through and ensure that we choose appropriate data types on a column by column basis. These four principles will take you a long ways in creating the most efficient and effective queries that you possibly can inside the Power Query Editor. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open up our Power BI desktop file that will support this particular sublesson. So we can see our GitHub files here, and I'm going to open up the file here that is sublesson 14. So let's just go ahead and open that desktop file up, and we will wait a moment. Okay, so we've got our Power BI desktop open. Once again, we're going to launch the Power Query Editor by using the transform data command, and we are brought into the Power Query Editor. So the first thing that we're going to do in this particular sublesson's demonstration is go and organize our queries here. So right now we can just see there's a group here called Other Queries, and everything right now is just folded in underneath. What we're going to do here is create several different groups for us to put our queries in. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to right-click in the empty space down here and say New Group. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple different groups into this. I'm going to create one called Facts. I will then go and create another group here called Dimensions, like so. And then I'll go and create one last group called Staging, like so. Okay, so now I have three different groups that I can use to organize my queries. So we have not yet really discussed the term facts or dimensions, what they mean. We're going to talk about them in lesson number 3. But back here on the Power Query side, we're going to look to start arranging our things using the terminology that we'll be using in dimensional modeling on a go-forward basis here in Power BI. So what we're going to do here is any of the queries that are used to average, sum, min, max, or count. Those are queries that we do aggregations on, and those are called facts. So the only real fact query that we have here is this one called sales. So I'm going to click on sales, and I'm just going to drag it up and drop it into that fact group right there. The next group I have here is what are called dimensions. So these are the ways that we're going to filter and aggregate and label reports that we go ahead and build in Power BI Desktop based on the fact tables. So the dimensions that we have in our model are order date, so I'm going to put that up here, product, that goes in here as well, sales territories, that goes there as well, and that should do it for our dimensions. The other queries we have here are what are referred to as staging queries. So they only come as far as the Power Query Editor, and they're used to help the transformation process out, but that's it. So they're not going to work their way into the actual data model itself. So we're just going to take country population data and put it in staging as well, because it was just a sample to show us how to pull web data down. The United States sales, we're going to move that into staging as well, as we will with product level and other country sales. So now I have all of my queries organized into different groups. So what I'm going to do here is just quickly click close and apply, and then we're going to go back to the Power BI desktop and show you what things look like from the desktop perspective. So let's go ahead and let things load up. And then what we're going to do here is concentrate on the fields pane on the right-hand side here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We can see that we have a number of tables being delivered from Power Query. And some of these tables we don't actually need. So country population data we don't want for doing our further analytics. Other country sales, we don't want it because that data is actually inside of sales. Product we want to keep. Product levels we can get rid of because the two columns we cared about inside product level are inside the product table. The sales query we want to keep, or the sales table I should say, we want to keep. Sales territories we want to keep, and United States sales, once again, we can get rid of this table because its data is inside of this table here called sales. So let's show you how to go ahead and keep these tables from being delivered into the actual data model itself. So I'm going to click on the Transform Data tab here, and we're going to get back into the Power Query editor. Now, these 4 queries here that I put in the staging area, we actually don't want these being delivered back or over into the actual data model itself. So what I'm going to do is right click on each one of these things and go down to this Enable Load checkbox. It's going to give me a warning that disabling this load from the data model may break reports or visualizations. Good news is we haven't actually created any visualizations yet. We're not worried about breaking anything. So I'm going to go ahead and click Continue. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that for these other 3 queries. Okay, so I've repeated the same steps that I did on country population data for the other 3 queries. Now we can see that all 4 of these are italicized, which means they have been disabled from being loaded over onto our data model. So what we're going to show you here now is I'm going to click Close and Apply here again and show you what happened to our data model. So let's go Close and Apply and let Power Query go through and do the loading of the data into the model. And what we're going to see here now is we're left with 4 tables and 4 tables only. And these are the 4 tables that we care about from an analytic perspective as we go forward in this particular class. Okay, so I'm going to move back now into the Power Query editor to show you what the data model looks like here now. And there we go. So we've actually got our queries now grouped into appropriate groupings. And we've turned off some of the queries that we don't want to actually get delivered to the data model, these 4 queries in particular. So this is a fairly small model. We're not bringing lots of data in here, but we can already see how this is starting to grow on us a little bit. And getting into some good organizational habits early on will certainly pay dividends as our models start to grow. Okay, so next let's focus in on some other things we can do from a housekeeping perspective to our queries. So I'm going to focus in on the product query this time. And now what I'm going to do is right click on product queries and go down to the bottom here to properties. Now the properties dialog will come up, and here's where I could rename the query if I wanted to and actually add a description. So I'm going to add a description in here for this query just so that we have a little bit of metadata around just in case somebody else comes in to support this file. Or I want to come in at some later date and see what exactly happened around this and maybe where did I get this file from. So I just dropped a comment in here saying this file comes from Bob in Marketing and it will be delivered monthly. So now if somebody comes into the Power Query editor and wants to understand where the product query is coming from, at least we have some commentary in here. Now, is this verbose enough? Maybe, maybe not for this example here, but I just want to show you that I have the ability to actually add some descriptions in. And if I wanted to, I could actually uncheck this checkbox right here if I didn't want the product query to get delivered to the data model. So I have the ability to enable and disable that here in the actual query properties. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK because I've done everything I want to do to this. So you could go through each one of the queries here and put a description around it and build that documentation up directly inside of the Power Query editor. In my mind, that's where the documentation really belongs. There's certainly nothing wrong with outside or external documentation. Maybe you have some Visio diagrams, some Word documents that support how the solution was all pulled together. But the nuts and bolts of how this work really belongs inside of Power Query because this is where people are going to go first to start dissecting things, and if all the information is there for where things come from, then you're in a much better spot from a supportability standpoint. All right, so next we're going to draw our attention over here to the applied steps, which are part of the query settings. And what we're going to do here is we can do something similar in that we can actually rename these applied steps and give them a description. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to focus in on this applied step that was called cleaned text. And if you recall, this was enabled us to get rid of some of the special characters and carriage return line feeds that were sitting in our data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to right click on clean text and go down to properties. and it will go ahead and bring up the properties dialog box. And here's where I'm going to rename the steps so it makes a little bit more sense and actually add a description into things as well. Okay, so what I had done is I renamed that step from clean text to removed non-printable characters and added a description here as well that says data source was found to have non-printable characters that we needed to remove. So I've added a little bit more description around this particular step here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and give it a moment, and then it's going to make my applied steps pane a little bit bigger here, the query settings pane. And I can see now that the step has been renamed to remove non-printable characters. And if I hover my mouse over top of it, I'm going to see the commentary that I put in there as well. So each one of these steps can be documented individually. And in order to build an application that is truly maintainable over the course of time, in my mind, it's a really good practice to go through and rename these steps as they're created and put some documentation in where appropriate to help support your application. Okay, and lastly, what we can do here is, if we wanted to, we could move some of our applied steps around. So this is something you have to tread cautiously around, because you could break the dependencies that are set up in this applied step. So if I wanted to, I could move this removed columns from here up to the previous step. That looks like it went and broke things, so that's not necessarily a good move. So now I'm going to go ahead and take that and move it back down here. So I have the ability to move things around. I just need to be careful about how I move things around, because you have to keep in mind you're setting up a dependency chain here. So what we can also do is we can actually go through and remove certain steps. So we've done this in the past here. I'm just going to click on this removed columns, because the two columns we got rid of were the length before and length after. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that. And I'll go through and actually repeat the step, but I wanted to show you that they have the ability to actually go ahead and remove steps from the applied steps process. So here I'm going to go ahead and just say remove those columns, and there's my applied step added back in. Once again, reminding you the fact that there is no undo button inside of the Power Creator, so you have to be careful about how you go ahead and do your work here. So one other thing I wanted to show you as well is you can see that the product query has a lot of applied steps here. So if you want to see the culmination of all the M code that was developed, we showed you how you can see it as we go through each applied step in the formula bar here. But what if we want to see what all of it looks like? What I can do is go to the Home tab, and under the query group here, there's a command called Advanced Editor. If I click on that, that will bring me to all the M code that was generated as we went through and built this product query up and did the transformations. So you can go in here and play around with this M code if you see fit. Not something we really advise on too early in the process. If you're just getting used to the Power Query Editor, we tend to recommend you stay away a little bit from the M query language until you get comfortable with Power Query itself. But as you progress in your Power BI journey, you will eventually come to a point where understanding the M language is certainly handy as you do more work with the Power Query Editor itself. Okay, and lastly, what we want to show here is in the View tab, there's this group over here called Dependencies and the command called Query Dependencies. If I click on this, I can see all of the data sources that I have in my file and how they were all brought together. So let's just suppose, I just go in a little deeper here to zoom in here. If I want to take a look at this sales query right here, I can see how it was all built up. I can see that some of the sales query came from United States sales, which has had its loads disabled, and its source was this file right here called United States XLS. So I can see the dependencies here. I can go over here and see that the other country's sales query came from a folder of data. So I can see how everything came together to build out sales, which is quite nice. I can also, if I want, take a look at the product query. So keeping in mind the product query was built from the product file and product level. So I can see those two dependencies there. And I can also see the commentary that we added into the product query as well to remind me this file came from Bob in marketing and that we're going to deliver it on a monthly basis. So the one nice thing here about, or one of the many nice things about the query dependencies here, is that it lets you see visually how everything has been pulled together inside of the Power Query Editor. I'm just going to go ahead and close that. All right, so that was just a brief tour through some of the things that allow you to do a little bit of organization inside of the Power Query in terms of documentation, putting your queries into proper groups, naming your applied steps, and then pulling it all together and showing the query dependencies. All of these things here go a long ways towards creating an application that is a lot more maintainable over the course of time.